All right, so glad that you're here. This is Wonders of Worms, and the first thing that I just wanted to touch in is just a few little housekeeping details, and just so that we're all on the same page. Those of you who are here live, you just know that I am recording. If you don't want your video on during the recording session, you can always turn your video off. I do ask when we go to the breakout rooms that the breakout rooms will not be recorded. And that's why we need someone to be taking some notes for us. That recording, I'm going to share it on my April's Teaching Tree website, and I'm also going to put it up on my YouTube channel. So this session tonight will be available for people to watch afterwards. And so if you enjoy this evening, but you want to go back and listen to something, or you want to share it with a colleague or coworker or friend, you can always share that link with them. I do want this to be interactive. We'll have probably about 20 to 25 minutes in a breakout room. And I anticipate during that time that we'll get started with that probably around 6:30. Looking at the time, probably like 6:35. And ideally in breakout rooms, we want them to be interactive. So if you can have your camera and mic on for that section, that would be great. If your camera can't be on for some reason, it would still be good if you could be interactive and talk. And so the breakout rooms will be self-selected, meaning you get to choose which room you go to. So you're not stuck in a room that's not of interest to you. There will be a certificate of attendance. This certificate is for those folks who are here live. So if you're watching the recording, sorry, I can't issue a certificate for watching the recording, but please, if you're here live, make sure you stay on until the end. I am going to share with you a link that you're going to click on and fill out as proof that you were here until the end. And my game plan for what's going to be on the certificate, I want to tell you what's on there. And then if there's some other detail that maybe you need for your state or your province or wherever you're tuning in from, you can let me know and I can add it. And my plan is to have a quick turnaround time. Hopefully tomorrow you'll get this. But the certificate's going to have the date, the time, a summary description of the class, the number of hours, and my signature. So those are the details that people who've already reached out to me about the certificate, that's what they needed for their state. If you are here from Vermont and I have your BFIS number, we're going to already it's going to go directly into our system with Northern Lights. So essentially, the main point is stay until the end if you want the certificate, and you'll have this link to fill out a Google form, and you'll get what you need. And for the folks who are tuning in from Vermont, you already gave me my BFIS number, or sorry, you gave your BFIS number when you registered, so I don't need it again. So don't feel nervous. That form doesn't, if you don't have your BFIS number. And for my away friends, you'll get the certificate in the mail. Not in the mail, in the email. Sorry, I'm excited for tonight. Also, in the email that you get from me, it's going to be coming from my business, which is called April's Teaching Tree. The way that I sent the links was just through my Gmail, but I want to be able to send this to you from April's Teaching Tree. And so what happens, I'm mentioning it because it may land in, if you have a Gmail, it may land in your promotions or other email services. It may land in your spam. So tomorrow, say by tomorrow evening, I would expect this email will go out. I'll have the recording link. I'm going to share the slide deck that I'm sharing tonight because some of the slides might be useful for you for some reason. I'm also going to share the co-created Wonders of Worms unit that we create tonight together, and then the certificate and also the DPD. Those of you who are listening to the recording and you want the Wonders of Worms unit, you can either look in the notes section in YouTube. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, in the notes section, it'll be a link to that unit. And I also will have a related blog post on my website, which is aprilsteachingtree.com. So you could find that blog post, and the link to that resource will be there. Okay. A lot of you are new, which is quite exciting. And a lot of you I've been working with for like a decade or more. So I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is April Zajko. My master's degree is in curriculum instruction from the University of Virginia. I grew up in Delaware. I spent a good chunk of time, almost a decade in Virginia, before moving to Vermont. And we've been here in Vermont for 16 years. And I just love living in places that have the four seasons. Though as I've been here longer, I'm ready for for a little bit lighter of a winter, but I am an experienced nature-based educator. I started a nature preschool in 2010 and was there for 4 years, and I loved that experience. And I also wanted to have more equity and go back into working in a public school. And so I've continued to sort of like play lots of different roles, but I am a part-time public school teacher. And I am just going to mute folks here. And I'm a college faculty member. So I teach for our community. I teach undergraduate courses for our community college here in Vermont. CCV is Community College of Vermont. And I also teach nature-based early childhood education college courses that folks can take either for undergraduate or graduate credit. So this really isn't a commercial, but just to let people know the work that I do. And so those courses, one is growing outdoor classrooms, which I know Lisa here is currently enrolled in that, and a couple of people have taken it in the past. It's all about developing. It's like a step-by-step process of developing your outdoor classroom. And I teach a curriculum development for nature-based educators. And that one this summer is at a reduced cost because we have some grant funds to cover the cost. And that's part of that ECEI in Castleton. This information I'm just sharing with you because I think it's important that we learn how to, to be able to promote the things that we do. And I also offer series of things. I'm doing a process art series this summer. I'm doing a curriculum series in August. And one of the really fun ones, we just finished Wonders of Winter. We did that in January and February of this year. It was really great. And I'm going to offer that again beginning in November. But I also am the moderator of Nature Inspired Teacher, which is a Facebook group. And if you're not a member of that, I encourage you to become a member. I think, oh, good. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for that. The Nature Inspired Teacher is the name of a Facebook group. Obviously, it's free to join. But I love this space as a way to support other folks who are really looking at bringing nature into their classrooms. And when I think about, that word teacher, that can be, teacher can be in any kind of realm. I feel like most of my experience is with ages 0 to 8, primarily with preschoolers, but I also work with elementary age children, upper elementary age children, and I work with adults. But this group is really meant to be a really positive space to ask questions, to get feedback. I suggest people share their wins, tell us what's working, show photos of what's working, share your woes, what's not working, and help each other give support. And it's a really fun group. I feel like it's grown to about 6,000 people, which is really awesome. And it's not just about like the metrics of the numbers, but to really think it's encouraging to think this number of people are interested in doing that kind of work. Those of you who are close by, I'm going to be at the kindergarten conference with my good friend, Kristen Langus. She is the education director at a primarily outdoor program. So she and I are going to the kindergarten conference to tackle the topic of math in the outdoor classrooms. Up in Newport in May, I'm going to be doing a full day conference with them on gardening with kids. And coming in June, we're going to do a full day conference called Rooted in Nature. Colleen Chrisman is of Wild Roots. She and I are partnering up to do a full day conference for really thinking about how do we step further into this work that we're doing. And so all of this information I share out on my blog, but a few people are here tonight, so I want to shout them out too. Dr. Joanne Spots is going to be doing a risky play training with me. We don't have the date scheduled quite yet, but this will be a free virtual event that we do, and it'll come out in the newsletter. And I was looking over her the plan of what we're doing. She just last year she earned her EDD, and her focus for her research, her graduate research, was risky play. And so the session we're doing is called Going Beyond Climbing Trees and Jumping Off. I have too many things open, off boulders. So I think it's gonna be a great session. And my friend Suzette Salmon, she's a family child care provider in Illinois. She and I are going to do a session, and I'm hoping it's going to be on mud kitchens, because she has this amazing mud kitchen download if you go to her website. And then the last little thing, I know it feels like a giant commercial, but Victoria Hackett, many of you might know her. She has the Outdoor Classroom website, and she just started a podcast in 2023. I think she's like 9 episodes into her podcasting journey, and I'm super excited because I'm going to be interviewed on her podcast. It'll air in May, but it's all about teaching and learning in the outdoor classroom. So those are some important things. So if there's a few people who would want to be a recorder, I would love to have a few more. If we end up not having recorders, what will happen is that this co-created document that we're going to make is going to be a lot shorter. And so you don't have to be a professional typist, or it doesn't have to be super polished. You're essentially just typing some notes in a Google Docs.
April, I
Okay.
don't mind being a recorder. This
Oh,
is
okay.
Holly Reed.
Oh, Holly Ream. Perfect.
I'll
Thank
need
you.
to put it on the paper and then transfer it into the Google Doc later.
That is fine. That is totally fine. And I'm so glad you're here. It's good to hear your voice.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Yes, Caroline, I will send a link to those other trainings. Karen Sampson, thank you. She says that she can be a recorder, and so does Lisa.
Do you need another April? I'll do it, Emily.
Okay, Emily. Hey, Emily teaches right down the road from me. Thanks, Emily. I appreciate that. And all right, Caroline also said, oh, thanks, guys. Good. I was starting to feel a little nervous. Caroline and Margaret. Oh, okay. And Margaret wants to be in the infant. Margot. How is this? Margot. Sorry. I was looking at it and I was like, I know it's not Margaret because there's no. Where do I go with that? Margot with the silent T. Yes. Awesome. You could be in the infant toddler group. That would be fantastic. All right. Yes, so we can keep this interactive. Oh, thanks, Dawn. Dawn Seaver also says she could be a recorder. Perfect. So use the chat box throughout the time so that we can keep it interactive, or feel free to even to unmute. I don't mind those interruptions at all, because I always say it gives me a time to take a sip of water. And just kind of thinking, like setting the framework to, of this work. We each are think about education and our curriculum in different ways. My own journey as a teacher, when I very first got my first own classroom, I was a first grade teacher in a public school in Virginia. It was very rigid. We had a scope and sequence that was completely, it wasn't teacher directed. It was like supervisory union directed or school district directed. This scope and sequence, a supervisor came and checked in on me to make sure that I was on the right topic, that I was moving at the right pace, and they couldn't answer the question about, yeah, but if kids can't do this yet, why are we moving on to do that? And it was like, nope, we are, it was in the year 2000. And so it was all about No Child Left Behind, making adequate AYP, adequate yearly progress, that is. And it was like, nope, this is the curriculum. You have to stick with it, and it was dreadful. And so I had a scripted curriculum for literacy. I had um, a, a workbook curriculum that I had to follow for math, and then these scopes and sequences for science and social studies. So it was very much feeling like I was in a box. And it was challenging because I knew that it wasn't meeting all of the children's needs. And why did they hire me as a trained professional, yet not trust me to be able to teach and to use my own pedagogy and my own knowledge to know what the kids really needed? So it was hard to work in that kind of setting. From there, I feel like I shifted into being a more of a thematic teacher, but definitely very teacher-led, meaning like the lessons were focused on what I wanted to do. It was my agenda. And how convenient, I can just map out the whole year. And so it's still very much like having a scope and sequence, except, I do have a little bit of agency and a little bit of autonomy in what is in the sequence, but again, still very much in the box. And since that time, when I moved into being a nature-based educator, I really shifted into recognizing the importance of child-led and learning how to trust children's inquiry and trust children's questions for real, authentic kinds of learning. And so I like to think about this topic of worms as, yes, we're putting planning into it, and we're going to have like a little clutch of ideas and materials and things that we can do with children about worms. But we're also probably going to, for me, like I've been kind of waiting for that first exclamation of, oh my gosh, I found a worm, and here in Vermont, just for some context, it's the end of March. And, it's been a sort of weird winter, quite mild. And then late season, we've had a lot of snow, but it's all melted in my outdoor classroom, or mostly melted, almost all melted. And we've had some warm days. So sap is flowing. I'm doing maple sugaring at home with my maple trees. But in my outdoor classroom today, all of last week, I was like, okay, we got to find the first worm. Like I was like determined, especially knowing we're going to do this session tonight. And we didn't. It just was a little bit too early. But today we found the first worms, and it was so exciting to find them. And I think that to me, it's like that journey of, becoming, letting go of the reins. Like there's a lot of, in many ways, it's easier to plan out the whole year and kind of have it mapped out and follow that as your curriculum. It's easy from, for the teachers, but teacher's perspective. But when we really want engaged learning, when we want kids to be fully in, when we want them to be seen and heard and valued, emergent curriculum is so much different. Oh, Emily, who teaches right down the road from me, or she has a home program right down the road, she too said that they found their first worm today. So yay, we're on the same page. It was like super exciting. And I was, oh, like Sarah also found her first worm today. Those of you who are calling in from other places, maybe you're not there yet, or you already have gotten there. But worms, I think, is just such a fun topic. And let me clip over that slide. So building some background knowledge. So why worms? I really think it's important that we focus on nearby nature. Yeah, Paula, who's who's here from I was gonna say Las Vegas, no, Los Angeles area, says when it rains, the worms are all over the sidewalks. Yeah, and that's a really great like kind of inquiry to have with the kids, like, well, why do you think? And in some of the children's books that we have, there are a couple of them that talk about worms and water. And when it rains, the rain comes in and it floods their tunnels, or their burrows. And so they don't want to drown, so they have to come out. And so that's why we find worms, coming out when it's raining. But nearby nature, I think, is really important. And so sometimes when people are just sort of getting interested in this idea of nature-based approaches, it can feel a little bit overwhelming to them because they're like, well, I'm not a naturalist. I don't know a lot of things. I might not have enough materials. And do I have to buy a whole bunch of new books? And do I have to do, it's like all of these sort of like bits of overwhelm about it. But Oh, that's funny. Jocelyn says that worms are still hiding with 2 feet of snow here in southern Vermont. Yeah, what's been interesting is I'm in the northern part of Vermont. I live just an hour from the Canadian border. We have less snow here than our friends in the southern part of the state, just the way the snowfalls have happened. So it's kind of curious. But earthworms really are a favorite topic in the springtime because you find the first ones. Kids are fascinated by them. We know that leaves and plant matter is food for worms. And so, we can talk about like feeding the worms. We have raised beds in my outdoor classroom. And so there was a bunch of leaf litter that was sort of mulched into the beds last year. And so the kids have been, digging as it's thawed out, and they're turning that leaf litter over. And so we were talking today about, it's almost like we're feeding the worms because worms love to eat leaves, and they, and so it's kind of a fun feeling. So we can be a steward of the worms. We can feed the worms that are outside, or we could even create a worm farm indoors, or a wormery, so it's called, or vermicomposting. We at home, I have a worm composting bin, and it's just a great teaching tool. I mean, it's a practical tool to decrease our food waste that's going into the landfill. We can put it into our vermicompost or worm compost farm, our worm farm. They eat.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the difference? This might be a silly question. What is the difference between normal compost and worm compost?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a normal compost bin would be a bin that you have outdoors, and you're layering in your greens and your browns. And so greens are those things like grass clippings, food, or vegetables and things like that. And your browns would be like dried leaves and dried kind of matter. And you're kind of making layers in your compost bin with those greens and those browns. And so the difference with a worm farm is that it is a bin, and it has worms. The type that we have at home, they're called red wigglers, and I brought some to show you. And one of the breakout rooms is going to be worm composting. So we'll have a group that focuses on that. And I know from the comments, so the worm bin it's a very large bin. Actually, this is a picture. The one that I have at home is called Can of Worms. So you can actually buy a plastic bin. It's a commercially made bin that has these layers in it. And you can buy those, and then you put your food scraps in it, and you start it with the type of worms are called red wigglers, or that's what we have. And so the worm composting here, we have to keep it indoors, whereas traditional composting is done outdoors. So that's kind of the main difference. But these red wigglers are really quite small, and they the color of them is kind of unique. They're actually usually normally a little bit redder or reddish browner. These are kind of almost yellowish, and that's kind of part of the fun too, is that you get to learn sort of as you go. And so let's see, we have several people in the chat, which is great. And
so you had said that if you were doing worm composting, it needs to stay indoors, you're saying?
For me, where I live, it does.
Yes.
If you live somewhere, I'm not sure of the exact temperature that it has to stay.
Okay.
It actually, I just turned to the right page. It has to be, worms will tolerate a wide temperature range from about 50 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're in an area that doesn't get below 50, or if you if you kept it indoors, like for the colder months, and then you put it out the others. But yeah, worms, the worm composting, the name of the bin that I have, Kim, is called Can O Worms. I didn't do a lot of research to tell you like which worm composting bin is the best. This is one that there was someone moving away, and we've had it probably about 10 years now, but I had a friend who was moving away, and she was like, my husband said, I can't take the worms. So I got the bin just as from her. I would,
Did it come with the book?
Yeah, this one came with a book.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. And other people, you can also Google online. So you can do, you can make a worm, like a small scale worm farm just in a jar. Like, you know, those glass pickle jars where it's like the
Yes.
large ones. You can make a small scale one just for doing some observation and short term kinds of things.
Okay.
But many people, and we'll have a breakout room where people will, who are interested in worm composting. Hopefully a few people who, ooh, it's really, okay, there's a lot of soil on my desk now.
I thought you dumped the worms out.
It wasn't that
I was
bad.
like, oh boy, her
No.
face.
I know. Ooh, it's getting hot in here. No, but we'll have a breakout room. So we'll be able to we could brainstorm, or a small group will brainstorm, and we'll share a little bit more after the breakout rooms about that. But in the chat, there is someone who says that they made theirs out of a tote and drilled holes and can grow as a tower. Yeah, and so you can, like this bin is going to cost more than making your own, like out of a tote.
Right.
If you wanted to do it just as an observational thing, you could also use a jar that you've poked holes in the top. And I have a link for making a jar wormery is what they call them. So you could do it that way too. But there's several people on here who say that they have vermicomposting in their classrooms, their childcare centers, someone in their kindergarten classroom. And yeah, that it's fun to care for them and see the process. And it's really super simple. Essentially, all that you really need to keep in mind is that you have to feed them fresh veggies. They don't like things that are really acidic. And as long as, the only problem that we kind of run into it with is sometimes in the summer we put too much fruit in there and we end up getting fruit flies. But if you're layering things in there and kind of keeping it like a healthy system, it doesn't smell at all. It's quite amazing. How challenging is it to keep the classroom from smelling when composting with worms? I haven't found it really hard at all. The worm composting, the larger bin that I have is here at home. And then I take some worms with me to the classroom and we do a smaller scale version and observe the worms. But several people chimed in that they have them just within their classroom. And Kristen says it doesn't smell at all for her either. Yeah, can of worms. It's super easy to do. I know some people in Vermont have gotten some nice significant farm to school grants. And so if you think about composting, or worm composting really helps close that loop, that might be a way that you could be able to purchase it with some grant money. Yeah, and Lisa says there's YouTube has some great resources for different bin ideas. And oh, good. Thanks, Nicole. She dropped a link to making a wormery. And there's some other things.
Can I share? I've
Yes.
got two separate worm composting in my backyard. Here in
Okay.
California, we are now required to put food scraps either in our green bins where when the gardeners come, or to be composting. So I found this thing called Sub Pod. It's pretty good size. And it's got holes, so you feed the worms, but the worms go out into your soil, which enriches your soil, and they will come back to feed. Right now, they're feeding really well in that. And I also have them in a raised bed. And my granddaughter and I spend a lot of time with the raised bed. So
Cool.
they get fed every week in the raised bed. And right now, because of the rain, they're actually higher up in the soil because it gets kind of murky down on the bottom.
Right.
So they're coming up a little bit, and we just feed them every week. And in a classroom situation, if you have the children, sharing with them what kind of food the worms need, put a bowl on the table at lunchtime and toss in their fruits and vegetables that are left over. No spices. Worms cannot tolerate spices.
Okay.
So it's got to be fresh fruits and vegetables.
All right. That's awesome. And so Paula, in California, you're able to have them out year round. Is that what you were saying?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The Sub Pod has been in the ground about 1.5 years now.
Oh, cool.
And in the summertime, the worms sort of went a little bit further into my garden. And with the rain, they've come back. It's really interesting watching what's happening there. So if
Yeah.
you've got garden space in your on your school property, to get a sub pod is really kind of interesting because you'll dig in somewhere and the worms they're all over. It's very interesting.
Very cool. Yeah. And do you remember how much were they expensive? I'm just wondering. I haven't.
It was like 100 and something, not
Okay.
not too bad, but you
Okay.
know, if you get a grant for it, I mean, this is here in my house, so
Yeah.
but if you got a grant for it at for your schools, you get it paid for that way.
Oh, cool. Yeah, for sure. I love that. Anybody else want to chime in on worm farms or
April,
Yeah.
this is Nancy Witherell. I'm in Vermont, and one of the things I want to caution everybody is that most of our worms are not native species. And red wigglers in particular in Vermont, and I don't know about other states, can be very destructive to our environment. And so the red wigglers that you get for a worm farm indoors should never be put outdoors. And we also are being invaded by something called jumping worms, which came from Asia, which are extremely destructive to our environment. And what they do is they eat through the humus layer, the top layer of the forest, very, very quickly. So they deplete the nutrients and keep other understory plants from growing. So wherever you are, it's important to research what worms you're using and what worms are native and not native.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that. And that is definitely really important. So the worms that you have in your worm farm that you're going to keep for worm composting generally are red, or what I see in my area is red wigglers. And so you never want to release them outdoors. And in my research, what I was finding is that there are no native worms. This is what I read just yesterday. In North America. All of them have come from Europe. I think it was like in the last ice age, maybe they had died off, but that there is these more invasive species that we want to, keep in check. And so, yeah, thanks for that with the red wigglers. And then also with the jumping worms is something that I guess I've never experienced that here of my own self, but it sounds like it's becoming more common. So, okay, we're at 6:40 and I do want to have a breakout room. And so the way that we're going to do this is I have 10 rooms set up, and actually let me show them to you with the slide deck. Here we go. I've got all the things open here. So the breakout rooms, we're thinking in the breakout rooms of brainstorming with others about teaching about worms. And so the 10 different rooms that I've thought of kind of either are a domain, like a domain of development, or a content area, or something sort of specialized based on worms. So I was thinking of having a group that's focused on gross motor skills. What are gross motor games or activities that we could do that reinforce or teach about worms? What are some fine motor activities that we could do with children? Social, emotional, literacy, math, science, and then have sort of a special interest group specifically for infants and toddlers, and another one that's for family home childcare. And I know that there's overlap between the two there, but just kind of thinking, kind of knowing who's here, it'd be good to sort of have two groups that are like that. And then group 9 is going to focus on worm farms or wormeries. So tips on creating them in a classroom or making it work. And so, hopefully we have someone who's already knowledgeable that could be in that room to kind of talk and brainstorm. And because we want to be able to share out in the whole group that. And the last one, actually, let me see. I must have set that up wrong. The last one, because I put this in the description, there are some people who they're like, you know what? My kids always want to touch worms and I can't stand them. And my goal tonight is not to convince you that you should like it. But if you're worm phobic or worm, kind of not excited about them, instead of joining a room, stay in the main room, and we're going to kind of brainstorm our own, talk a little bit about that. And that section will be recorded. So if you're staying in the main room, the recording will continue to go. But I want to like brainstorm a little bit because it's, you know, it's okay if you don't like worms, but you know, how do you continue to teach about something that you dislike, right? And so we're going to kind of unpack that and chat about it. So the way that this is going to work, oh, lots of great messages. I'm gonna have to scroll back here. What kind of worms should we be using? Oh yeah, Sarah Barrows asked, what kind of worms to use just for an observation wormery? What I would do is the ways that I've done it in the past is find a few worms outdoors and put them in the jar and create the worm. And I have a PDF that I'm going to send to you that talks specifically about how you create those. And we observe them for a short period of time, making sure that it is soil has drainage, that there's some gravel on the bottom so it can drain, and that there's enough food in there for them to eat. And then when we're done, I'm thinking short term, like just a couple of weeks, and then being able to let them go back in the same place that we gathered them from. Okay, so let's see. Oh, cool. Jocelyn says only $18. Good alternative if you don't want to make your own. It looks nice and small. Okay, cool. There's a link there that Jocelyn, and the notes from the chat, I will add them into our document so that we have it. Oh, okay. Too many things going on here. So let me put the link to the document into for my recorders. Okay, let's see. So we're going to be putting the notes in. Okay, just a second. I have a lot of tabs open here. We're going to be putting the notes into a Google Doc. And so what you can do, those of you who are going to be a recorder, you're just going to find your section in the Google Doc and then just put your notes in there. And I'm going to go back and clean it up. Meaning like, you know, don't worry that it has to be like just perfect or anything. I just need to, let's see. Okay, this needs to have full access. Oops. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So you're going to self-select which one you want to be there. So let's see. Probably the best way to do this is the folks who said they would be a recorder. Margot, you said you wanted to do the infant and toddler.
Yeah, I can do that.
Let's see, Dawn, which group did you want to, or which room did you want to go into?
Science, please.
The science one? Okay, perfect. So that's Dawn. Caroline, which one did you want to go to?
Oh, I did not volunteer to be a recorder.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry.
No problem. No problem. I misunderstood in the chat. That's totally fine. Let me just see here. All right. I just want to make sure when I share this that it is.
I'll record. I'll be, if I could do the worm composting, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Can you just tell me? I don't have my Zoom screen up. So it's Lisa. Okay, perfect.
Lisa C. Yes.
Okay. All right. Lisa is going to do the worm farm. Holly, which one do you want? There's gross motor, fine motor, social emotional, literacy, math.
I can do fine motor.
Fine motor. Okay. Thanks, Holly. And Emily, do you want to do the family home?
I think Susie said she wanted to do that.
Oh, that was Susie. Okay, sorry. All right. All right. So we still need We still need someone for math and for literacy, social emotional.
Looks
I
like
can do the
Dawn.
social emotional.
Okay,
Sarah will
that's
do that.
Sarah Hinckley, right? Okay. So I'm dropping,
April, do you have, oh, sorry. Do you have anyone for the physical development?
no.
I'll do that.
Okay, so Sarah Hinckley said social emotional, and who just said gross motor?
Oh, that's me, Megan.
Megan, thanks, Megan.
Yeah,
All
no
right.
problem.
So if you are a recorder, the link is in the chat, and actually anyone can use that. That's going to be the link that I send to you tomorrow. When I send you the link tomorrow, it's going to be cleaned up a little bit, but I think that I still need someone for literacy and someone for math, if I'm not mistaken.
April, you can put me wherever.
Okay,
You need.
Kristen, I recognize your voice. Kristen, I'm going to
Yeah.
put.
Well, I had my camera was delayed. I don't know. It's on now, but
Okay, I
I
can
have
hear.
to get into that doc.
Awesome. So Kristen, I'm going to put you in with math. Okay. So sorry.
April,
that
I
took so
don't
much.
think I don't think we have edit access on that doc
Oh,
yet.
come on. Okay. Okay. Wait. Anyone with the link? Oh, there.
Oh, right.
Okay, hold on. I just changed it, and maybe let me give an. Okay, let me close that, and I can do technology is my mantra. Here's the updated link, and you do have edit access with this one. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Lisa.
we're good. Thank you.
Awesome. All
And
right.
this is Donna. I said I would record if you still need someone.
Okay, Donna, thanks for that. I think that we could use one for literacy, and then I think we're in good shape. So what you're going to do in the way that the breakout room, how you self-select is, I just clicked on this. So I'm going to open, wait, I've missed one. So I have gross motor. All right. Gross motor, fine motor, social, emotional, literacy, math, science, infant, toddler, family. Okay. So the rooms are open. If you go along the task bar, there is a one that says breakout rooms, and you can click on there, and then you scroll down to the one you want to go to, and you click on the little blue number that's on the right hand side, and that will move you into the room. We're going to take 20 minutes, which means we're going to come back at 7:10, and I'll give you an advanced 1 minute notification. If you don't see that number, if you're like, I don't know how to go, what is she talking about? You can just tell it. We're going to wait a few minutes while people move over into the breakout rooms, but I can manually put you in there too. It's just easier to do once there's less people in the main room, or less people in that box. So like gross motor right now has 1, fine motor has 1, social emotional has 5, literacy has 1, math doesn't have any yet, but Kristen I know is going to that one.
April.
Well, April, how do I get into?
That's okay.
Sorry. What am I looking for? Am I looking in the Google?
No, in the breakout
looking?
rooms, it's here in Zoom along the taskbar.
Oh, right, because I shrunk my Zoom. That's probably why.
That's
my window
probably
is
why.
smaller. Oh, right.
What are you
there
logged
it
in
is.
as?
Okay, so you guys have to make
KML.
your.
Okay. I couldn't find you.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, that's fine.
I haven't fixed that yet.
Yeah. I can tell you how, but I just clicked on math, so for you it should pop up.
April, did you need me to run a room, or did you get them all taken care of?
Do you want to? Let's see. I don't know. Family home was
Already, someone already had taken that, because I can just go anywhere that, it's not a big deal. I'm
Okay,
just making
that's
sure
totally-
you're covered.
Do you have
that's
somebody
totally
for
fine.
social and emotional? Because it says social, it doesn't have a name. I'm not sure if that was.
Oh, yeah, that should be social emotional.
But there's no name to it. I was wondering maybe you needed somebody.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Social emotional. Let me go back to where I was typing my notes.
And I might need to have you put me into my group, because every time I try to go back, I lose my Google Docs, and I can't keep going back and forth.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying. In the Google Doc, instead of social emotional, I didn't put anyone. I got you. Was that the one that you were gonna do? Is that what you're saying?
Not me. I was just
Not you.
saying,
Okay,
she was asking if there was any more
Okay.
need for somebody.
okay.
Lisa.
Yeah, so Emily, if you want to do the social emotional one, I didn't assign, I think I wrote the wrong thing there. I don't know. It's all
Okay.
gonna work out. All right. Social emotional. Okay. All right, so now that we have a smaller group, if you need help getting into a room, you can tell me just which one and I can send you there. So Dawn, you want to go
Yeah.
into,
Into the, sorry, social, no, science.
science? Okay,
Thank
yeah,
you.
no problem. So Dawn is going to science. Perfect, I got you. And Diane?
Family, home
Okay.
providers.
Wonderful families, okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Belinda, which one do you want to go to? Wait,
I'm actually waiting to see what the numbers are
thank you.
and then go into something that's not a lot of
Okay.
people that are in there.
Okay.
Who's doing fine motor? Is that Holly?
Yeah, Holly's in fine motor. Do you want to go to that one?
I've got the board up, so I'll go in with Holly because there's only one in there.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we don't want her to be lonely.
No.
That's funny. All right. Lori, which one did you want to go to?
I was staying in here with you for
Okay, for the worm
phobic.
phobic. Okay, awesome. And is that what, Kelly, is that what you want to do too? We're good? Okay. All right. Ooh, I'm just gonna take a breath. It's a
That
lot
was
And
of
I need to
mental.
bounce out just
Yeah,
before 4,
Paula.
so I figured I'll just stay here.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, awesome.
Okay,
That's right.
April, can
Yes.
you put me literacy room?
In literacy, sure thing. Let me find. All right. Okay.
Oh, I forgot you were in California and you said before 4. I was like, what is she talking about? I'm sitting here staring at my screen like it's almost 7. You're way late.
We haven't had dinner yet. Are you kidding? It's not
My
4
God.
o'clock.
7 o'clock here.
It's so funny. We had I got home from preschool today and it was like 3, well, I got home around 4:30 or so. And I had several emails and people were like, we're waiting, we're not able to log in. I'm waiting for you. And I'm like, wait, so I emailed back. I'm like, no, it's, and I tried to be really specific, 6 to 8 p.m. EST, Eastern Standard Time, but several people kind of got that wrong, but oh well. Yeah, so I want to kind of open this kind of conversation to just thinking about like, how do we support, I guess the worm phobic thing could be both for children and for adults. And so how do we support adults, whether it's ourselves or other coworkers that we have? And so I think the conversation to start with is adults, so even if it's a topic that we're not interested in, or we aren't really super comfortable with touching worms or exploring with worms, how do we continue to encourage children's inquiry and wonderings and explorations? And so to me, I think a lot of that has to do with how we talk about it and what our mannerisms are and what our face is doing and what we're saying. And I think it's also okay to let kids know that I'm not really comfortable with worms yet, and maybe the yet is like, you're never going to be comfortable with worms. But I think just like with food, in food education, I talk a lot with my children about, don't yuck my yum. Maybe you don't like this yet, but we don't want to yuck someone else's yum. So the same kind of goes true with these sorts of explorations. Like, yeah, maybe it's not your thing, but if we can kind of keep that in check, and build, an environment where children are able to explore, I think that could be really important. But I want to just kind of open this up for dialogue and hear, what challenges are you facing? Is it for yourself, or is it more for children who are not are worm phobic?
I feel as if I struggle with it personally, and it's not just with worms, it's literally like any, like if they find a creature outside, please keep it far away from me. Because but I try to like think, I'm like, oh, if they can sense that you're nervous, they're gonna be nervous about it. So it's like they can definitely see that my body's tense, and I'm like, oh, that's such a cool worm. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm going over here now. And it's like I try not to tell them that I'm afraid of it, because I feel like there's always the kids that are going to be like, oh, well, then I'm going to chase you with it. But then there's also the kids that are going to, because I work with 3-year-olds, there's also going to be the kids that are like, oh, well, if you're afraid of it, I'm afraid of it, kind of thing. So I try to like act as tough about the situation as I can. Last summer, actually, my coworker, Madeline Olson, I don't know if you know her. She's a very big advocate for all the critters in the woods, and she had this huge wolf spider, and she brought it in for all the kids to see, and we kept it in the cage in the room, and I would literally sit on the other side of the room, and she's like, well, how can I make you feel comfortable about the spider getting in there? And every day, like, I would get a little bit closer, but when it came time, like, she would take her lunch break and it would just be me in there. I would sit on the opposite side of the room because all I could picture was it falling over, crawling out. I'd have to be the one to save all of the children. And she's like, how can I make you comfortable? And I said, get it out of the classroom and don't show me any kind of insects that is in the woods where we bring the kids to play, please, because I'm not going to want to go in there. But definitely, like I said, just trying to like act like you're not scared works very well for me.
Yeah. And I think too that it kind of comes down to, it's like not acting scared and also letting kids know that, I mean, I think there's something in being truthful with kids and being like, I'm not really comfortable much with that, but I'm so excited that you're interested in it. And I can tell that you love to explore about worms. And it's so interesting how every time we come out here, you find that thing. But I think there is a conversation to have about how do you, respect, build that respect with them. And I love that quote that your coworker said, how can I, what was it again? How do I make you comfortable?
How can I make you comfortable with the spider in here?
Yeah. That's really great. And I think that some children have never really had those experiences where they see something, they think it's disgusting and they step on it, and it's kind of like, it's what they've always known. And so I think it's important that we don't come at them with like shame or blame, but like, oh, wait, here, at preschool or here at whatever, we want to remember that this is their home. And so you might not like him, you might not like that worm, or you might not like that insect, but you can go somewhere else and just let him be. Or, or if it's in the indoor classroom, I usually like scoop it up and take it somewhere else if it's an insect or a spider. But I think it's a really good teaching time, and thinking about like empathy that we have is important. So yeah.
That's what I was also thinking about with the worm composting. Like if they were to see kind of what goes into taking care of a worm and how important they are to like eat down the foods and stuff like that, if maybe they wouldn't, see it out on the pavement and want to stomp on it after seeing how cool it is to see them eat and grow and whatnot. Just like the butterflies we have done in our classroom before.
Right. And it's like you're building in that lifelong, stewardship kind of idea, and for some children, they'll be like, wait, we use worms when we go fishing, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, actually, you're right. You do.
You're right. Yeah. In a different sense.
It's a different context. Who else wants to chime in about worm phobia or worm phobic?
For me, it's more about the kid. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Lori, you can go, and then Kelly can go.
For me, it's more about the kids who have really sensory issues and don't want to touch anything dirty and don't want to really be outside in general. And then when you add dirt and mud and worms to it, it adds a whole nother layer of ooh factor for them.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard for some children, no matter how excited the adults are around them or the other children, it's just their level of comfort with them. And, we always encourage them, but of course, if they want to walk away, they can walk away. But, that's really was why I wanted to be in this group, to see if anyone had any suggestions for how to encourage those children and include them so that they don't miss out on those important things,
Mhm.
but also so they don't feel like it's a have to, because it's not.
Right. And I think that for me, I can remember a time, that's, boy, it's almost probably 10 years ago, but I had a set of twins, and it was interesting because one twin like super excited about worms and the other one not at all. And the one who was not interested at all was like, like gagging, and it was like, it was like over, like kind of what you're describing, like sensory overwhelm, and just really not just dislike them, but like like made them nauseous thinking about it or being around them. And so giving the child that option, that there's no requirement that they participate, but then also giving them ways that they might be able to observe worms without touching them. So like getting today we had these like plastic plates out, like really thick, durable plastic plates. And I put some, some of the kids who were finding worms, we're putting them on there. And this one child today who didn't really want to touch them was like, they were interested to just kind of take a peek and look, but it was like, they didn't have to get their hands dirty. They didn't have to touch it. And the girl from the twins years ago, what I found is we did it multiple times because I had brought some of the red wigglers from home into the classroom. And so we were able to observe them, over the course of a few weeks. And, there was no pressure for her to like interact with them or whatever, but I think she felt like she was missing out because kids were having so much fun with it. And like, they were like sort of the positive peer pressure to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, or like, especially the way, like the segments of the worms, like how they have each segment of the worm's body has muscles. And so it kind of expands and contracts in order to move, and so the kids came up with this idea of like, they could tell there's certain worms, they said they were stronger, or it may just be that they were more active at that time, but it was like the kid enthusiasm of being interested in it sort of like
It's
enticed
contagious.
her. Yes, exactly. And so she got closer and got closer, and it was like, it was so fun to kind of like witness it. And it took multiple exposures. And that's why with, having those multiple opportunities to do things is good, because sometimes it takes kids a while to do it. And just like with, I think like multiple exposures, it takes away some of the overwhelm. So Kelly, what were you thinking? I'm sorry, you just took a drink of water.
I don't ever really touch them. If I have to, then I will.
Yeah.
The kids that come here love them. We've never really done a lot, but they tend to rip them apart, and they just play with them so much that they're like dead. They like get all dried out, and we'll sit we'll watch it dig its way into the hole in the grass or whatever, but I've never really brought them out to play with them or whatever. And then, there's the kids that will squish them, like like step on, we're all watching a woolly bear, or we're all watching this worm, and the one that's all of a sudden I'll turn my back and smush, it's gone. And it's like,
we all have one
like,
of those kids.
There's like 8 faces right there, and then all of a sudden it's dead, and we're all like, what are you doing? But anyways, I just never really touched them. Like I said, it's only me at a home daycare. So
right. And I think that is a little bit challenging too, is that you have mixed ages. So it's like, and so kids are at different stages, and it's hard to be in all, when you're one person, it's really hard to, be in all of the places at one time. So yeah, I think, I think that you're right, that kids in their process of observing worms, like we do want to make sure that we've taught them. And so I have a slide for that, which I think I'll share when we come back into the whole group. But the idea about gentle hands, and like, how do we, how do we teach them about gentle hands and how to treat a worm? And there is this myth, or it's actually not really a myth, but a misconception that worms regenerate. And so what I, again, not a super expert at worms, but for my research, it sounds like some worms, like if like a tip of their part of their body, like either tip of their body is damaged, that it can regenerate. But it's not like, oh, we rip a worm in half and now it's two worms, it doesn't work that way. And so I think helping kids to build that empathy for them and to know that they're, that we have this responsibility, if we're observing them, to take good care of them. And worms' skin does need to be wet because they breathe through their skin. And so if we're handling them a lot and they're getting really dried out, then what's going to happen is they can't, that they'll end up dying. Worms also do have like this mucus kind of like substance that they excrete that helps them keep moist and helps them to be able to move through the soil. But it's no match for the sun. So if we've got the worms out of the moist soil and we're touching them and they're getting dry that way, and it's warm out or the sun is out drying them, that when they get dried up, that they end up dying, and so it's happened to all of us. I think that we end up finding a dead worm. And so part of that conversation is how do we, how do we deal with that? What's the best way to.
What do you do to keep them alive if they're getting dried out?
Yeah, so what I do is I keep a check on them. So like today, the kids found something. It wasn't an earthworm, it was a grub. Actually, we found several things that were not earthworms today that the kids were like, well, tell me about them. And I'm like, I'm going to need to do some further research, actually.
Yeah.
But the grubs, the grub that we found today, it was not moving very much at all. And then I think because it was in the cold soil, it was kind of dormant, right? But then it started moving around and we were like, oh my goodness, it definitely is alive. And I kept saying to the kids, keep it in this, keep it on top of the soil. But they were like, it's the first one, right? So they just like, were wanting to touch it. And it was like the only one we had found at first.
I was just gonna say, was there only one? Because whenever we see a worm, I'm like, please be at least 3 or so. The first one's not gonna last.
Yes, exactly. Because you're like, oh man, like he can't go at this totally alone. Yeah, and so I think having multiple ones is good too, because then it's not so many hands are on like one individual one. But that thing, it wasn't even an earthworm, it was a grub. But what happened is you could just tell that it was like it was like limp, and it was like didn't seem the same as when we found it. And so I started asking some questions and kind of leading the conversation to the fact that it doesn't look like it's doing well. What should we do to help him? With the hope that the kids were going to say, oh, we're going to put it back in the soil and leave it alone. And it took a while to get them there because they were like, no, it's the only one. Like, we can't let him go. Like, what would we do then? Like they didn't quite get it. But a couple of the kids did decide, oh, wait, it is important that we keep him alive. And so, just that idea that we are kind of responsible for keeping them healthy. And so keeping a check on them, I think, is important, so that they do, survive.
We do still have quite a bit of snow at my house. We will for a while, but in the woods up on the hill, there's a little bit of snow that's going, so that might start defrosting sooner, but
yeah,
we're not going to have worms for a while here.
Yeah. And last week I kept looking, I was like, because I was really eager, because I was like, I want to have like current, like experiences with kids and what they have to say and those kinds of things. But last week we couldn't find any, and then today we were able to find them, and we ended up finding quite a lot. And it was just fun because the excitement, sort of returned. And I don't know, today it was sort of like no one was interested in worms before today, and now everyone's really interested in them. And so far, well, the kids that were there today, I did have a few kids that were absent. They all seemed really excited about the topic, which is always fun too. So it's like, yay, we can dive, even a little bit deeper into that. So, Chrissy, did you want to add anything or chime in? We only have like a minute left.
Well, I was just kind of thinking about all of it, and just, I think for me, I'm kind of like Kelly, like I will touch them if I have to, but I'd prefer not to. And I was just thinking kind of maybe to help would be to have maybe something leading up to wait before you start talking, like where you talk to the kids before you actually see the worms.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about like that one she has that doesn't want to touch it, having something where they can, have a few in a jar to start with versus.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And I think you're right, like leading up to it and getting kids comfortable with it kind of makes sense. It kind of desensitizes them. Or someone put in the chat, was it, Amanda said exposure therapy, so kind of like they get more familiar with it. And, having positive experiences of like reading stories about them, kind of, it just warms up. I was going to say warm, W-A-R-M, warms them up to the idea. Kind of sounds like a play on words, but you know what I mean. So, all right, everyone's going to be hopping back in here, and let me find my notes. All right. Okay. All right. So let's see. For doing attendance, if anybody is like 2 in one screen, so Emily, you are Emily Tanner, you guys are together there. I know you are 2 in one screen. Is there anybody else that has 2 people in one?
I do, but only one of us actually signed up, and we're not doing certificate or anything like that anyway.
Okay,
so,
awesome.
yeah.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah,
I think I saw April and Holly were together.
Oh, okay.
Holly Rayom and April.
Is April with Holly? Is that April Blake?
Yeah.
No, April is not with me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw both your names.
That was it did say that, but that was from the last time.
Oh.
That we were on a meeting and we were together.
Okay.
And I just forgot to change it.
All right. So we're going to hop into sharing out from our breakout rooms, and we have 10 rooms. And we have 10 rooms, and we have doing a quick bit of math here, because sometimes what happens is we get stuck in a single room, and then at the end we're like rushed, to do a bunch. So we finish at 8, which means we have 45 minutes, but I want to leave enough room for you to fill out that form. So let's say that 40 be 30. If we took like 3 to 4 minutes for each group, I think that'll work really well. And so thank you so much to the people who agreed to be recorders for us. I think what I'll do is just kind of go through the list. So the physical development group, do you want to chime in? What were some ideas about physical development?
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute. I keep forgetting.
That's okay.
So it was just me and another woman named Jean, right? She's out there. Anyway, it was lovely. It was a nice intimate group. She's a teacher right up the road, so that was really special. We came up with a little list. It's in the Google Docs.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, I just have to pull it up. So we have, for gross motor, moving like a worm, move at the pace of a worm.
Oh.
The next one could also fall under fine motor, but it's shoveling, raking, and scooping in gardens for worms, because that's that gross motor piece. Thank you. Racking like a worm. Obstacle course built like a worm's home. So you use like lots of tunnels.
Yes.
Which kids love to crawl, or boxes even. And then for a game, you would first observe how a worm moves and uses its muscles. And then holding your legs and arms against your body, you would then try to move as like the worm did. And then you would kind of come together and talk about, is it similar to how a worm moves? What is different? What can we do that a worm cannot do? And then vice versa.
Awesome.
What can a worm do that we can't do?
That's really cool. That's a really comprehensive list. I love it. Yeah. What? Oh, did I interrupt you?
No. That's all we.
Okay. No, perfect. And one of the things that I think too with physical development is to talk to kids about, because worms' bodies look different than ours. So like you've identified physical activities that worms can do that we can't do, and we can do stuff they can't because obviously our bodies are made differently. But one of the really interesting kind of anatomy facts about worms is when you look at a worm, they have those segments and there's muscles in each of those segments. And so when we watch closely with a worm moving, that they're contracting those muscles, and then, like the way that, I'm sure there's a really technical term for it, but that movement of like expand and contract to be able to move them. And I love the idea of, of like how, like the length of time, I forget how you worded it, but not just move like it, but what did you say?
Move at the pace of a worm.
Yeah, move at the pace of a worm. That is a really fun one. And it kind of slows us down too. I have seen kids do worm races, and they'll find certain worms and like, oh, this is the one, this worm's pace is the fastest. And like it's almost like, like a little fun worm competition, but lots of great ideas there. I love them. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. All right, fine. Let me just check that. Let me move my boxes around here. Fine motor is going to be next. Yeah, worm wriggling would be good, and worm dances I think could be fun as well. Okay, fine motor.
I was in fine motor with Belinda, and I don't remember who the other lady was.
It was Holly, Belinda, and Sarah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, and we came up with having a sensory bin with dirt or soil and add worms. They could be real, or they could be pipe cleaners or rubber worms with tweezers and scooping and making Play-Doh worms, beating worms onto pipe, making pipe cleaner with beads into a worm. Finger paints, you could use just the finger paints. You could have them do it in a worm outline shape. For older kids, Belinda has school agers. You could use seed beads and a needle to make the worms, cutting a worm shape and painting it. Worms, writing your name in the worm shape, stringing a string in paint and drawing on paper or canvas with it. Making a dirt cake with gummy worms. Pipe cleaners with holes in a box or a plastic jar or colander, and just bringing the pipe cleaners through. Worms in mud or dirt in individual dish pans for them to play in. Stringing Cheerios, doing a worm dig, writing the parts of the worms, or just even making worms with shapes with markers or crayons. Your finger being the worm, maybe finding some finger plays, and talking about what do you think of about worms when what do you think about? So drawing the dirt, drawing the worms, drawing maybe some flowers.
Nice. Those are great. Awesome. Thanks, Holly. Yeah, in the chat, Kristen Wood also chimed in for gross motor. You could do, or someone named Danny Go does a fun wiggle dance on YouTube that mentions moving like a worm. So, you know, I'm sure there's other videos too of like worm dances on YouTube. And for fine motor, Anne suggests string pull painting. So one of the questions when people, someone signed up for the training was like, what do you think about painting with worms? And for me, I don't want to put paint on the skin of live worms. So if I was going to do some like worm painting, I probably would buy something or make just string, you know, and pretend that the string is the worms. Or there's like fishing lures that look like very realistic kinds of looking worms. You know, so doing some worm painting that way, whether with string or with, you know, fake pretend worms, I think could be fun. Belinda also mentions measuring the worm. So, you know, under fine motor, doing some things with measurement too, which ties into math. Awesome. Thank you, fine motor group. The social emotional group.
I want to go just to that measuring worms.
Yeah.
We're having like rulers made with a little groove in it.
Yeah.
I think you can buy them commercially, but we're going to get a couple made so you can put your actual worm in there.
Yes.
To see its measurement.
Yeah, I love that idea. I've seen those recently, like on Facebook or Instagram, and I was like, oh, that's really fun. And the person had just like used a router to kind of make a tunnel, like make a thing to put the worm in, and then did some wood burning on them. And but the ones that I saw were from the UK, and it's like with the shipping, I was like, okay, that's ridiculously priced when I could get a piece of pallet wood and kind of do something similar. But that would be a fun way of, you know, doing some standard measurement. And, you know, some of the feedback on one of the posts that I was reading is they were like so worried about the worm, like being on the wood. And we didn't really talk about this yet, but we in my group, when we were talking about worm phobia, you know, making sure that we're also teaching children and about how do we how do we use gentle hands, and how do we keep a check on our worms too, to make sure that they're not getting dried up. So, you know, when we are observing with worms, we want to make sure that we're teaching empathy to kids, and that we're using our gentle hands, and we're not like stretching them or being rough with them. But worms breathe through their skin, and they need their skin to be moist in order to be able to breathe. Worms also have this mucus that they produce for their body, but that mucus is no match for the sun. And so if we're playing with worms, our hands are drying them out, and it's a hot day, and the sun is beating down on them, you know, worms will die as a result. And so we want to make sure that we're, you know, being careful to protect them as well.
We'd always taught that you don't wash your hands before you pick up the worm, that you actually want to get mud on your hands.
Yeah.
And use your soap after.
Yes, exactly. And I've heard that too, like kind of like we need nature hands, you know, or come up with some sort of term for it. But it's almost like you get your hands, you know, you put your hands in the soil and kind of get them, you know, covered with soil. And so now we have nature hands, and nature hands are so much better for touching worms. Same thing with, you know, salamanders, things like that. Like we want to make sure that we're teaching that. And that's that part of building empathy and building respect. And in our group, we talked too about many children have never been taught, like they see something that they find disgusting and they step on it, you know, and that's just what they've seen. That's what's modeled for them at home. And so we have this opportunity not to come at them with shame and blame and like, why did you do that? And that's a horrible thing, and you're a horrible person, but to say, oh, whoa, here, the way that we, you know, the way that we handle that here, you know, when you're at school or when you're with me, this is their home. And so we want to protect them. And, or if it's an indoor thing, we're going to scoop him up and get him back outside where he should be, or it should be. And, you know, helping children, teaching them that. And it may be the first time that they've ever really seen that. And so when children have that reaction to, you know, like they see the daddy long leg or the worm or whatever they see, and they step on it, it's like we have this opportunity to model, to teach, and to support them. And in doing so, we're building that empathy muscle, and we're building stewardship skills for children. And what's really great, I forget her name, but she is one of my students from last summer. She teaches at North Branch Nature Center, and she created one of her research projects for the course was creating a niche, I forget how she called it, a natureness inventory kind of thing. Like, how do children react to elements in nature? You know, are they would they stomp on the bug? Would they feel comfortable with the bug? This isn't exactly her research project, but noticing that in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And our hope is that us modeling and teaching and reading books about things and worms and nature, that their natureness increases, or their comfortable and their stewardship skills kind of increase. Okay, social and
Oh, can I
emotional.
ask?
Oh yeah,
sorry.
no, go
May I ask
ahead,
a
Megan.
question?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what I come across a lot with worms on the playground is children will try to save them from the sandbox or the puddles. And sometimes they are still alive, but sometimes they're dead. And we know what is the best thing to do? I always have them put them in the garden, but then sometimes they end up dying anyway. So I always feel so bad. Like maybe I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that I usually handle that is I'm like, it's not moving. And it looks like, it looks like it may have died. And, one of the things that I think about, like, we shouldn't shy away from talking to children about death. And so we can talk about that, and we can also say, but we don't know, maybe the safest spot for us to put him would be in, I keep using pronouns, but the safest place to put the worm would be in the garden. Let's try to go take care of him. And who knows, we'll see, and you can bury it, and you can have conversations, about, will it come back or will it not? But I do think, talking about, a different example would be like finding a dead bird. If you find a dead bird, it's not going to magically come back to life. Like, it's part of, it's dead. And so I think having those conversations with children is important, and also checking in with them and deciding, well, what are we going to do? What could we do about the dead bird? And then deciding your path of action. And, burying the dead bird right in your raised bed where you're growing carrots, probably not what you want to do, but finding a safe place that you could bury the bird. And, I think is important. But yeah, with worms, sometimes what I like this today, when the first thing we found was a grub. And I was like, I wasn't convinced that it even was alive, but we were treating it as if it was. And then it kind of woke up and it moved around for a while. And we were like, wow, that's really interesting. It almost felt like he thawed out, and then after the kids have been observing him for a while, his body composition was very limp. And it was like, ooh, this doesn't look really healthy. And so I kept encouraging the kids to stop touching it because it wasn't looking healthy. And then brainstorming with the kids, like, if he is feeling tired or he isn't doing well, what could we do with it? And kind of helping them to kind of get to the point where they realize, oh, my actions, even though we're so excited and so thankful we found this thing, we also should let it go and go back into the ground. Okay, social emotional. That was a kind of a larger group. I think you had maybe 7 or so in there.
I can speak. We lost our note taker right at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Sarah got kicked off. So we talked a lot about actually what you were just talking about, April, in terms of, how do we mitigate the squashing, the pinching, the, what empathy lessons can be learned from handling worms, as well as, what can we observe from them? So Betsy was talking about an idea of putting down a piece of plexiglass in the garden and then putting a piece of wood on top of it. So it's still, a cool, dark space. And then pulling it off and having more of a chance to get an insider look of what it might look like to have these worms making their homes and making their trails and everything. So that, we're observing what their lives are like, and then we're also hopefully creating a little empathy There was a book that was mentioned that I don't remember the name of. Feel free to chime in. Whoever it was who suggested.
It was Bree Finds a Friend.
Bree Finds a Friend. And yeah, that was most of what we talked about is, you know, fostering empathy and, yeah, we talked about, you know, what makes, I was saying one of the phrases that we use with my group is something along the lines of, you know, what do we have to do to be kind visitors in nature? And what does that mean to be respectful? Because that was the main thing that I was coming into this group thinking about is I have some friends in my class who their first go-to is squish it immediately. So as many tools as I can get in my tool belt of, you know, creating more of that empathy in at least a second before the squishing happens.
Yeah.
Personification we talked about can be helpful, like giving them pronouns or names. Yeah, feel free for anyone else who is there to chime in too.
Yeah, pronouns and names. Someone also just in the chat box earlier was saying, you know, the worm wants to go back to his home and wants to get back to his family. And, you know, so if this thing has pronouns or it has a name or they're thinking that it has a family, you know, then it's like that is personification, but it also is relatable to the children. And so I love that idea that you said, like kind visitors in nature, you know, and to bring that as a teaching moment of like, what does it mean to be a kind visitor in nature, you know? And so like today we found a lot of trash on our in our outdoor play area, which is never really a problem, but it just almost, you know, and so we were like, oh, well, we have a responsibility like to clean this up. And I think that whole thing about like, don't squish the creepy crawlies or whatever you want to call them, like don't squish the bugs. It's a teaching moment. And I think that it's not a worm book, but it's a really good book. It's called, wait, it just went out of my head. The one with Hey Little Ant. And so I can't think of the author's name at the moment, but Hey Little Ant, it's about ants, but it switches the role. So it begins with this little boy with his foot up, you know, and deciding if he's going to squash the ant or not. And then the ant becomes human size and the human is ant size. And so it's this great conversation about, should we squish it? And what's interesting and also bothers some children is that the book doesn't have a resolution. It just kind of talks about, it says like, well, you get to decide, you know. And last spring, I read that book and a couple of the kids were like, no, they have to, the right answer is you don't step on them. And they were like really, not happy with that author because that author should have told people that you don't step on the ants, you know. And it was just so funny to think, you know, one of the kids, you know, in September was the one squashing all of the daddy long legs, you know, and now the kid's like angry that the author of this book didn't put that information in there. So, you know, we even though these seem like little lessons or little things that we're doing, it can have a profound impact, you know. And so I love that book, Hey Little Ant, and it's a good one. It's a little wordy, so for younger preschoolers or toddlers, you're probably just doing like a picture walk of it and kind of talking about it, but I think it's an important one. And the other thing that I would say along those same lines is that some people have this feeling that worms regenerate. And from my reading, from what I understand is that, you know, if a piece of a worm, some species of worms, I think there's 2,700 different species of worms was one of the statistics I read. But if pieces of the worm break off, that it may be able to regenerate its tip or its tail, but not all worms. So like, you know, if we rip a worm in half, some kids may believe that, oh, now we have two worms and everything's fine, but it's not. And so I think teaching teaching about that is probably important. And I think the more books that we're reading and have more understanding of like that a worm is a living creature. You know, prior to that, it's just kind of like something that we find. But I love Bree Finds a Friend. There's a new book to me. I'm going to have to check that one out. But I do like this idea that this simple thing of caring well for worms translates into the stewardship kinds of skills that we want our little people to grow up with, and to be able to do it in a way where, you know, that empathy muscle, like we build that towards these worms, but we're building that in our relationship to each other in our learning communities as well. So thank you, social emotional group. How about, oh, thanks, who anonymous kangaroo who's typing in. I was looking in the document. How about the literacy group? Or
before you move on, say something to the
absolutely.
I can't remember whether it was Jocelyn or Suzette, somebody in the family child care group, we were talking about, you know, the care of worms, and it came up that some of these, you know, really incredible naturalists dissected worms and other creepy crawlies when they were children. So I don't know where I stand on the spectrum, because I have always been, you know, let's observe with our eyes for the ones that I know they will smush, and let's, you know, make sure we release them and not hold them too long and hold them carefully, and everything is about empathy. However, that's such a valid point. Like there's, how do we figure out when it is appropriate to say, yes, let's get curious and see what the inside of a worm looks like, versus, you know, that's a living creature and we need to respect its body. Because if we want these children to grow up and be scientists and be naturalists and have this awareness of the world, they need to know that it's not like that is something that couldn't be done.
I was thinking the same thing, because I was like, at one point in my life, I know what the inside of a worm looks like. And I know that if you squeeze it, this is going to come out of it, because I experimented hands-on. And like, I want my kiddos to experience that too. But at the same time, I don't want to be like, yes, it's okay to squish bugs.
Yeah.
And I think if I can chime in, thank you,
absolutely.
Ann. Yeah, no, part of what I was saying too is also just like, yeah, that might happen, but we also don't want to create this culture of where kids are just afraid to touch and engage because they're so afraid they're going to hurt something, or so afraid, right? Like we can't be so afraid for the poor worms that they don't get to play.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's a valid point. And I think it's one of those things too, where you as a reflective teacher, kind of, you get to decide, you know, and, you know, if you know your group and you're like, you know what, this is how scientists and researchers do things, and you decide to do that. I wouldn't stand here in judgment of that at all, because I think you're right. I think that is how we learn about living creatures. And I grew up in Delaware, and the spawning season for horseshoe crabs is in May. And I have a very vivid memory of, not me, but my brother dissecting a living horseshoe crab. And those things are big, right? And they're archaic looking. Like when you flip one over, if you've never experienced that, is really interesting. And they also mate on top of each other. Like they kind of go like this. It's really interesting. But anyway, this very vivid memory of him dissecting that thing. And it's like, he is an ecology. He went on to, you know, study environmental science, and he works in a vocational school, and he's done a lot of work with Yale in creating curriculum for ecology and environmental science things. So it's kind of like, you know, you're right. I think there is a valid point of science and inquiry. And do we want to dissect a worm every day from now till, like, you know, when the ground freezes again? Probably not. So I think you get to kind of decide that with your group. Okay. The next group was literacy.
Here I am.
There you
are. We had a group of 5 of us, I think, and we tried to think of lots of different ways to approach the literacy. So something like the Diary of a Worm book, which, you know, is fun and grabs their attention, and it may not be factual, but it's going to gain their interest. And so thinking about having them think like your worm and write a story from first perspective as the worm, or, read factual books and write facts that draw and write about a worm that you find on the playground, or just thinking about worms when we're reading about them and writing what you know. But then taking the creativity of the worm into like letters, so using pipe cleaners or wiki sticks or even candy worms, and bend them to make letters and make words. Writing in the mud like you're the worm. Using, one of the teachers was saying she had swirled like vanilla and chocolate ice cream and created a mud color and added gummy worms. And then I was telling the story about talking about compost tea. I said I have red wigglers in my basement and I want to bring them to the preschool, and asking one of the other teachers who's a really big gardener, like, is she familiar with doing that? And does she know like proportions to make compost tea? And a third teacher overheard us and said, oh, yuck, what are you talking about? Why would you ever drink compost tea? And teaching the children how we could actually turn worm compost into tea that would be good for our garden. We also have a garden space, so we could use it. And so they would understand more about that. Someone had a really interesting book called Carl and the Meaning of Life. So Carl is the worm and he's on a journey to find out what meaning there is in his life. And he stops doing things he had been doing. And as he's continuing this quest, he's not doing what he used to do, like bringing the compost to his neighborhood, so the plants are dying, and he finally realizes, oh, what I had been doing is what I'm supposed to be doing, bringing meaning to his world. Helping the children to make little folded books so they can write about worms, draw about worms. They can take them home. Another teacher had said that she had cut some worms out of paper, and the children measured themselves or measured each other. And then they each made a page about themselves. I am so many worms tall. And then it becomes a book that they can bring home and share with their families, or we could measure other things around the classroom and make a book about that. And then we've got a few other worm book titles. Yucky Worms, It's a Good Thing There Are Worms, and Wiggle and Waggle. Yeah. Those are awesome. Some great new titles.
Yeah. And I feel like my collection of worm books, like sorry, I put that in the wrong spot. I have a collection of worm books, but every time I, talk with someone, I'm like, oh, I don't know Carl and the Meaning of Life. And of course I want to know that. I'm going to have to get that one. But I think you're right. The Diary of a Worm, when I have text sets for nature-based kinds of curriculum, I like to have fiction and nonfiction. I think that it helps kids to understand, between real and fantasy, and it's a literacy skill that we want them to have. I really like the illustrations in Diary of a Worm. And what I have found is that older preschoolers get it more and kind of seem to appreciate it more. One of the ones that I love for nonfiction is it's a small book. It's little, but it's called Earthworms by Lisa. And and someone else is typing in there now too, but in the document at the end, there'll be a book list. So I'll gather all of the books that have been mentioned and put them at the bottom there. But this one is called Earthworms by Lisa Stoltz. And what I like about it is that the photography is really clear and really helps to explain some concepts that kids are going to have questions about with worms, but does it with photos that are really, I actually would like the book to be bigger, because like in my preschool, I have 15 children. So it's better to have a little bit larger, but this one I find is a good book. Okay. Moving right along. Our time is going by really fast. Okay. Let's see. So I am also going to drop the link in the chat box is the link for the attendance. And so you're going to want to make sure that you fill that out so that you get credit for being here. But we're going to continue sharing out in our multitasking. Multitasking at 7:47 at night. But the math group, and so awesome, Donna, you were in there, and Kristen Langus, I think, was our recorder for that one.
Yeah, so we came up with way more ideas than we thought we'd be able to come up with. I mean, I'm pretty proud of our group. So basically, I mean, I know time is short, so I'll just be really quick because you guys will read this later, but we were thinking about things that involve either counting worms, measuring worms, weighing worms, comparing worms, trying to use like a worm, like a worm from your compost bin, as a unit of measurement. So like you know, the book, like what is a foot, and it's based on some guy's foot, I can't remember who, but you know, like just pick out a worm and measure how many worms long, how many worms tall are you, that sort of thing. So we had all sorts of ideas involving those ways of doing math. Yeah, it's actually so much that I'm going to let you guys probably read it. Yeah, it's pretty clear the way I wrote it, but worm races, you know, like how long does it take the worms to go from where you plop them down to the little tunnel you make in the newspaper, or comparing different types of worms and their sizes. So red wigglers versus the earthworms outside, and comparing their band, you know, the size of the band, the clitellum or clitella. I thought of making a finger play with numbers, since I'm always doing finger plays with 5 little da-da-da sitting on a wall, you know, like you could do something with worms that counts. Graphing, we had several ideas about graphing, or taking a poll, how many kids like to hold a worm, and figure that out. So yeah, we had so many ideas.
But I think that's the beauty of getting together in a small group, is you're like, oh, I had a few math ideas. And then it's like, wow, you know, 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, like, I've got all of these ideas. And I think that's kind of the beauty of having the document too, is that we'll, you know, I'll share that out. Everyone will have it tomorrow. And, you know, it is a rough draft, but it's like, it's enough. It's very generative. It gives you a lot of ideas. Someone in the chat too mentioned, wiggling worms at work. The illustrations in this one are really great. And then another one that was mentioned is Wonderful Worms by Linda Glasser. Also, I really like, I like the clarity. Sorry, there's a reflection here. Hold on. The clarity of the pictures, like the simplicity of the illustrations, but that they're really quite clear, I think, for kids to see. Okay, moving right along. So the link should be working. Oh, wait. Oh, someone says it isn't working. I think
April, I tried as well and I couldn't get it to work either.
Okay.
April,
It worked for me.
Yeah,
It worked for me too.
Okay. So if the link didn't work for you, hold on, and I'm gonna at the very end have you stay on, and I can make sure that I've got your name.
Yeah, it worked for me as well.
Okay, Dakota, thanks. Okay, but we still have groups to share, and I don't want to shortchange anyone. Science was a really big group, but and the science group, what were some ideas that came up there? That was Dawn was our note taker.
Yeah. Anybody wants to chime in, you can, from our group. I actually didn't see how many were in there because I was trying to type, but we talked about discussions with kids. So like making charts with kids. What do they want to know? What do they know? What do they want to learn? Questions about them, like what do they eat? What do they like for an environment? Like what do the castings look like, and go find them. The different parts of a worm, and making a worm farm out of a clear bottle. Somebody talked about putting a tube in the center so that it takes up the center space, so that they'll be on the edge for the kids to see, and then eventually putting black paper around them to give them the dark that they like when we're not observing. Somebody talked about a worm race that we did too. making circles and just making predictions about who will get into the circle faster, and putting different textures down to just make predictions and see what they prefer, damp or dry, with soil or sand, rocks. A lot about prediction and just discussion, which is really, up preschool alley, I think. Measuring worms, investigating their habitats, what do they need, discussions how to take care of worms. I think somebody already said in another group, probably the social and emotional group. How do they move so quickly? We can put in some math, but I think science and math and that all go together. The purpose of a worm, just teaching the purpose of a worm. What happens if we're not gentle? Talking about our skin oils and getting your hands dirty before you touch them. Talk about being scientists and really observing. So we talked a lot about observing them and prediction stuff again, but how fast will they get back down into the earth? How long will a worm be? Why are they sometimes short and sometimes long? Drench an area to watch how, them come to the surface. Recycle Rhonda out of Chittenden might be a resource. She had taught a group how to make a worm bin. And then books about parts and digestive system.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the, it's a whole lot. It's a lot. So many great ideas. You did a great job in your group, John. In one of the links that I'm going to send to you, it talks about 4 different ways to do a worm hunt. And you mentioned drenching an area. So like taking a hose and saturating, this would be in warmer weather when our ground is still kind of frozen, but saturating it with water and covering it. And what will happen is that the worms, they begin to, this sounds horrible because they're actually kind of, they are actually drowning. So they'll rise up to the top. But if you put something on top of them and wait like what I read was 30 minutes, but I think like 15 to 30 minutes, and then lift like that cover off, the worms will have risen to the top. So that's one way. Another way is actually stamping the ground. If you stamp the ground, like the vibrations from our feet, can help the vibrations cause the worms to come up top. And check out YouTube for that. It's really, really interesting. The other one was taking a pitchfork or a spade and putting it into the ground, like into a grassy area, and rocking back and forth for 15 minutes, which sounds like a long time to rock a pitchfork, but it might be a cooperative game that you could play where kids could, all come and kind of rock it, and the worms will come up with that. So drenching it, drenching it, the spade, the stamping the ground. Oh, and the fourth one was just having like a, whether it's a log or some sort of, maybe you have a worm rock, kids kind of name things sometimes, where you have a special spot where, worms you clear off all of the debris and put a log or a stump or a rock, and then kids can move it and look for the worms. So many good science ideas there. Thank you and thanks for all the good notes. Infant and toddler, you guys have some good notes in the Google Doc as well. Thank you for that. Do you someone from infant and toddler want to chime in?
I can, unless anyone else wants to speak.
Yeah, and I'm wondering about Wally the Wiggly Worm. Is that a good one for infants and toddlers? Because I feel like a lot of my worm books are way too technical for. I don't know Wally the Wiggly Worm.
That was when you read in your class, right? Tried and true and tested. It was really nice being in an infant toddler group because we are all infant toddler teachers. And we didn't have to backtrip and backflip from preschool ideas.
Yeah.
So that was really nice. And we all kind of seemed to come from like a mix of different spaces and mixed and single age. So we had some cool stuff. And I think Laureen had just like an awesome worm curriculum that she already does in her room that takes it from the very beginning of the kids starting with observations and just watching the worms in their environment, inside, outside, taking them places, and then kind of building up from there. So practicing with gummy worms and toys and pipe cleaners when you're inside, and measuring the worms, drawing up plans, like you can building the worm hotels out of other materials before going in for the big, the one that other people talked about with the things. So the worms all come to the side and whatever. She gave us like step-by-step instructions. All kiddos can participate. Like the little ones can do the different layers of sand and the bigs collect. Like everyone has a space in this curriculum, and it takes you all the way from learning about the worms to then writing your own going on a worm hunt story, and that the kids fill in with their knowledge, and taking it outside to go collect the worms for the worm hotel that you've prepped for. Like, mwah, it's beautiful. It does like a whole month's worth of activities for every age, and like scaffolds it all the way up, brings it full circle. It was like
Very
wonderful.
cool.
So it was so cool to have that shared with us.
So is that a curriculum that people can find for free online, or is it a purchase curriculum? I didn't quite catch that.
It's actually one that I just created.
Oh, cool, Lorraine.
And that I do in my room.
Oh, nice.
I
That's
can definitely
wonderful.
share. I can definitely share.
Yeah,
For
if you
sure.
are comfortable with that, that would be wonderful. I think,
Okay.
yeah, people would appreciate it. Yeah, email it to me. And I'll if if you're comfortable to share it out, then we can share it out. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
I
You're
think
welcome.
if I heard correctly, Laureen is the author of the Wiggly Worm.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it's
pretty
my
cool.
own book that I wrote, Wally the Wiggly Worm.
Oh, so
That I wrote
cool.
and edited. But I don't have any more copies, unfortunately.
So
I
we have to
only
wait
had
for
a
the
certain
second
number
print.
published.
Okay.
Bummer.
Bummer. Okay. That's too bad. Well, you let us know when it gets printed, and we'll let folks know. That's so great. I'm so glad you're here. That's awesome. We have just 1 minute left, and we have 2 groups still to share. And so I feel like you're getting shortchanged, which I was hoping not to. I'm dropping in the chat again, the Google form. So if you want to get a certificate for being here, you have to fill out that form so that I know you were here tonight. I have been trying to take attendance as we go, but it's hard with this number. And so if you have filled that out, you are all set and you can log off. If someone has a moment to stay on for family childcare or the wormery or worm farm, we can keep recording. But everyone else, if you filled out the form and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm set, it's 8 o'clock, I gotta log off, that's totally fine. You're all set as long as you filled that thing out. But does someone from the family childcare group have time to just share a little bit of and we'll just
I
kind of
can do the quick sharing because I wrote the notes and everything. So hi. So similar to what one of the ladies had talked about, Jocelyn has shared the story of the professor who talked about children investigating with worms and how they learn and then they become stewards and ambassadors of the world, like your brother did, and And then we had a question from Anne who wanted to know if children pick up worms and move them from different locations, are worms territorial? Do they thrive when they're relocated, or what happens? Are they going to build their homes all over again? Are we doing justice moving the worms, or what happens with those worms? That's one question. And then she also wanted to know, so what happened with the family child care was that we just shared information. We shared our knowledge of what we do. So it wasn't like just digging into one particular thing. We were looking in different directions of what we do with worms, right? Or what we know with worms, asking questions out loud. So she also wanted to know how we can dig through clay to get worms. And then another lady said, yes, if you dig really deep with clay, you can find worms because worms do live in clay. So that was like a question, do worms live in clay or don't they? And then we also wanted to know, where do worms go when it's cold? And then we investigated more about the worm, how they went deeper down into the earth. and how they survive, and then what makes them come out. And then I think it was Anne again, or Anne was talking about a tapping sound, like if you, just like what you mentioned about with the YouTube videos of tapping, and then the worms would come up. And then she also spoke about like birds. They also act like that too, and they get the worms to rise because they mimic the same tapping sound, especially the robins. That's exactly. And then the worms would rise, and they'd end up eating the worms, right? One of the other ladies, I think Kay, mentioned that in the summertime, she doesn't have like a worm farm, but her activity with her children, because in a home childcare is mixed age. So it's like pulling weeds and investigating with the worms. And even when you garden, you investigate with the worms too. Short paragraph. And then I shared some books too that I have, similar to you with the yucky worm. And then this big one that I have here, that I got, that shows different parts of the worms and everything. I can drop this into the
Google Doc.
The Google Docs, yes. But I like this one because it's so huge, because the infants and the toddlers, they really love this book. And you know how much infants and toddlers like big prints. So this one is a really good one with them. And then we spoke about the grants that Vermont gives for the home child care providers and the different opportunities that they have for building within the NOFA, or the Agricultural Association, and the networks. And then they talked about the cedar compost too. So it was really us just sharing what we do in our family childcare to help the children with worms. So I'll drop all of those notes in the Google Docs too.
Thank you so much. And so glad for you to be here. Suzette is a family childcare provider and an author, and she is phenomenal. And I'm hoping that she's going to do a mud kitchen version of this training. So no pressure, but totally putting you on the spot. That sometime soon. And she does trainings in her area, and she really drop in the chat too, Suzette, your Instagram, because the photos, it's just beautiful. Her photography skills are lovely, and I love following along on her journey. Okay, thank you so much for sticking around. Like I said, if you have done the Google Doc, you are welcome to log off. If the Google Doc didn't work for you, why don't you put your name into the chat, and that way I'll know who. Just say, well, we should streamline it, like form didn't work, and just put your full name, and I'll make sure that your certificate comes to you. But our last group to go is the worm farm. And there are good notes in the Google Doc there, but if someone's still on and wants to share about making a worm farm, that would be awesome. Okay.
I don't know if anybody's still on from our group or
Okay.
not, but I took notes for myself because I just like to do that.
Yes.
We talked, we had somebody that has made their own worm farm. And so she kind of talked us through, because I didn't really know how to do it. So she kind of gave us the lowdown on how to build your worm farm from scratch. And how much food to feed it, because that was my thought, is how do you know how much compost to feed it? And she said that she uses like a pencil organizer that she puts somewhere and collects the scraps. That's where the children know to put their food, so that they can feed the worms. And she suggested cutting up newspaper, a brown paper bag, whether you let the children do it as a fine motor activity, or you use your paper shredder to get rid of all those kind of things. She also created a sign, like yucky foods and yummy foods for the worm. And she had pictures so that the children knew what could go into the worm farm versus what couldn't go in. And she told us that we should start with the coconut, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, coconut coir, like the little things, the seed pod thingies.
Okay.
She said to start with that. That's one way we could do it. She said the newspaper layer, the coconut worms, and then give them food. And she said, when the layer is full of black dirt, then you can move up to the next layer or take your black dirt out to your garden or whatnot. What else did we talk about? That's pretty much it. We kind of went through a very detailed explanation of how to do it. It was great.
That's awesome. So good. And I do have a link to a couple of homemade versions of like the more of the observation jar, but I'll find a link tomorrow too. And I'll put, because there's lots of good, but I'm glad you got some good information there. Awesome. Well, I am so glad you're here. I enjoyed this session. I feel like our 2 hours zipped by. I can hang on for a few more minutes and answer any other questions, but I think we'll wrap it up here. And yay, so many people are going to do worms now with their kids if they hadn't already been doing it. So, but I can answer any last questions if there are any, but thanks so much and have a great night.
Thank you, April.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Donna, it's so good to see your face. Oops, she hung up. No, she's still there. Hi, Donna. Did you see my thing? I am in Newport on April 20th. No, May 20th.
I saw. Yeah, I saw
Okay.
that.
It's going to be fun. It's
Okay.
gardening, and it sounds like a nice lunch is provided. I don't want to oversell it, but I'm kind of excited.
Thank you, April.
Thank you.
Linda.
It was great.
Good night.
All right. My NEKPC people, you guys have a good time? You're going to do some
Yes.
worms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we put both of us on the?
Yeah, both of you need to fill out the Google form, so it'll be easy. But I have you, I use my trusty highlighter, but each of you fill out your own Google form. That would be good.
Okay.
Okay.
So I tried both of those links and I'm like clicking, double clicking. I can't get it.
Okay. So Kay, what's your last name?
It's Hamilton. And I put it in the chat. I put Beverly.
Oh, okay,
K.
perfect.
Hamilton.
All right. Yeah. If it's in the chat, then I'll get it. Yeah, you know, sometimes I think if you are using because it's a Google form, so if you don't have Gmail, then sometimes it's a little bit more
I don't have
complicated.
Gmail.
Okay, so that might be it. But thanks for
you.
being here, Kay.
Okay, thanks.
All right, have a great night.
Okay.
Bye-bye. All right, and Kim, you're the last one on. I don't know if you have any last question. Oh, okay, Kim, you say, would gardening focus on school year gardening, meaning would we need summer helpers? That's been an obstacle. Yeah, so I have some solutions for that, and the training that I'm doing in Newport, it's in Newport, Vermont. It's the Child Care Network training up there. We're going to be talking about, those are mostly home providers. So we're talking about gardens that, that they can do year round, but with working in a school that's a farm to school, have a lot of ideas about, how to plant things that you harvest more in the fall so that kids are there for the planting and they're there for the fall harvest. And low maintenance plants that you can use. And I do have a handout about that. So if you want to send me if you send me an email, I can share I have a handout called Gardening All Year.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay.
Because we were gonna make a tea garden at one point, try and help with that. But we have 3, and we have herbs in a different one, but we had tried some parent helpers and it got a little rogue with what they were planting in there.
Yeah.
And like what you can harvest during when the kids are actually there. So
yeah,
we love the idea, but we're kind of struggling with making it feel
even
okay.
Even focusing on easy to grow herbs that are basically like weeds. I mean, that's a kind of a good place to start because then they don't need a lot of maintenance through the summer and they're perennial. Like if you do a perennial herb garden, like a perennial tea garden. So even things like mint and lemon balm, which are once they're established, like they pretty much can take a beating, some of those, and then some other culinary herbs that are ones that are perennial that come back each year. So like oregano, thyme would come back. Rosemary for me here doesn't always come back, but kind of some easy to care for perennials, I think. But it's kind of hard because it's like you want to you want the project to be for the kids. And so if you're doing all of the work, then it's like,
Right.
right, kind of silly. But also think about how to tap into someone who needs community service. So National Honor Society kids or high school kids that need to have a project, or programs that run in the summertime that maybe have access to your space, where maybe taking care of gardening could be part of that stewardship or eco club or something. But it is hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those are awesome suggestions. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
tonight.
Thank you.
Take
Have
care.
a great night. Bye-bye.
Yep.